Hi and welcome back to the channel. This is just a quick video to go through a couple of small changes that have been made to Focus for the upcoming release 3.7.0. So I'm not going to talk much about the Donut Buster because there's a separate video all about that, but that's probably the bigger change in 3.7.0 as far as Focus is concerned. But in addition to that, there's a couple of other things. So first off is better integration with Analyze. So I guess this is most relevant for people using the system in an unattended mode. So now the graph in Analyze is rendered, more exactly in term as it is in the Focus module. So any error bars on the data points, if you have that selected, and if you have the refine curve fit option checked on, where outlying data points are excluded, and now that's now replicated in Analyze. In addition, there's a couple of reason codes for, first off, the reason why autofocus was started. So in this case, it's user initiated. Might be, for example, a time-based refocus, or an HFR check demanding a refocus, or several other options as well. So that reason code's passed through. In the case of a failure of autofocus, you also get the reason for the fail. So in this case, the R squared on the curve fit was below the minimum that had been set. Also, the data points are passed through, so it won't attempt to draw the curve because obviously autofocus failed, so probably not much point in doing that. But the actual data points are passed through to Analyze now. So the purpose of all this is, if you are running the system unattended, then if you review using the Analyze module in the morning what had gone on, if you do have some autofocus failures, you can kind of see a bit more about what was going on. So that's kind of the first change. The second change is this little button here that I've added, or checkbox rather, called Force Autofocus. So I don't have a sequence running, so this isn't going to do anything, but if a sequence were to be running, and if I just check that, then at the end of the current sub, it will force an autofocus. So again, for a planned session, if for some reason something has gone awry and you need to do an autofocus, you don't need to necessarily stop and restart the schedule. You can just tick this box and you'll get an autofocus when the current sub finishes. The next change is there's another option that I've added into the process options tab, called Average HFR Check. Now, just to recap slightly, so average over, I guess for most folks they'd set this to 1 frame, but you can set this higher, so you could set it to 5, for example, and what that would do is for each data point it'll take 5 exposures, and then it will just use some statistics to average the, for instance, if you have the HFR measure set, it'll use some statistics to average the HFR that it uses in its calculation. So the purpose of this is to kind of get over issues whereby you have a sort of an outlying data point. Now obviously with other code that's been put into Focus, because you're taking several data points and you're sort of putting a line of best fit through it, the benefit of taking multiple data points to overcome outliers is probably reduced in the general case. So I think most people would probably just have this set to 1 frame, but I'm sure some of you have it set higher, and that works to sort of diminish the the bad effect of outliers, but at the cost of obviously slowing autofocus down. So if you had this set to 5, then if you had 11 data points, you're going to take 5 times 11 exposures in order to complete an autofocus run. So that's going to be quite slow. So an alternative, and generally, as I say, the other processing that's been put into focus means that for most people, most of the time, leaving that at 1 is actually fine. There is a case though when it perhaps isn't great, and that is using the HFR check. So the HFR check relies on the HFR, or if you've set it up this way, it relies on the HFR that has come out of autofocus as the base, and then the check is performed using a percentage of that base value. Now, obviously, if that base value is not good, or if the frame that the HFR check is using is kind of an outlier rather than a more representative value, then of course the check is not going to be great. So if you're worried about that, you can now set this HFR check value to something other than 1, and what that would do if you had it set like I have here, which is the average over is set to 1 frame and the check value is set to 3 frames. When you run autofocus, it will only take 1 frame at each data point, which is probably what you want. But if you're using the HFR check, what it will do is that check frame it'll take 3 frames. So if that check, if your check frame happens to be an outlier, hopefully by taking more than 1 frame, you would kind of weed that out and potentially not have an autofocus when you didn't need one. If you have linear 1-pass set, which I'm sure most of you do now, the actual value of the in-focus data point will also use this value of 3 frames. So you're comparing a more robust sort of check value against a more robust value that the check functionality will use. So that, I think, is kind of it. Oh, sorry, just one more thing. I think this is probably only going to affect a very small percentage of folks, but there's now a delay that I've introduced in the autofocus overscan. So for 99% of people, you can leave this at 0. There have been a couple of instances where certain focusers have not been playing nicely with overscan. A way around it would be to set a non-zero value here, and what that would do is on the between the 2 movements of the overscan, so the outward and then the inward, it would wait however many seconds you set here before the end of the first movement, before starting the second movement. I think as of now, there are no focusers that have this problem, so most folks can just leave this at 0. But if you do happen to have a focuser that does have a problem with this, then one thing to try would be setting this above 0. But as I said at the start of that, this probably is a very, very unusual edge case. So for most folks, just leave that at 0. So that's it for now, and 370 should be out shortly.